The Vanishing Floor. The Hargrove apartment building was a relic from a bygone era. Towering high above the city, it boasted a combination of grandeur and decay that made it a landmark among the more modern structures surrounding it. The tenants had long grown accustomed to its quirks, the creaky elevators, the dimly lit hallways, and the odd way the floors seemed to shift at odd hours. Evelyn Collins, a recent college graduate, had just moved into one of the apartments on the 12th floor. She was excited about her new start, but her enthusiasm waned as she navigated the building's peculiarities. Despite her initial trepidation, she soon settled into a routine. One evening, Evelyn found herself in a conversation with her neighbor, Mr. Thompson, a kindly old man with a penchant for storytelling. They were discussing the oddities of the building when Mr. Thompson's eyes grew serious. "Have you ever heard about the 13th floor?" he asked, his voice lowering conspiratorially. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I thought this building only had 12 floors." "Exactly," Mr. Thompson replied with a knowing nod. "Most people don't realize that there's something odd about the 13th floor." Intrigued but skeptical, Evelyn laughed it off and changed the subject. However, that night, her curiosity got the better of her. She decided to investigate, determined to find out what Mr. Thompson had been hinting at. The elevator creaked its way up to the top floor. Evelyn noted that the 13th floor was conspicuously absent from the elevator's button panel. But when the elevator doors opened on the 12th floor, she saw a narrow, hidden stairwell at the end of the corridor. She had never noticed it before. Driven by a mix of excitement and apprehension, Evelyn climbed the stairs. They spiraled upward, and with each step, the air grew colder and more oppressive. Finally, she reached a door marked with a faded 13. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. The 13th floor was not like the rest of the building. It was pristine and untouched, the walls adorned with vintage wallpaper and ornate chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The floor was impeccably clean, as though it had never been walked on. Evelyn stepped out of the stairwell and into the hallway. It felt surreal, as if she had entered a different era. The rooms looked identical to those on the floors below, but something was unsettling. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, and every door looked the same. As she walked, Evelyn noticed a small, peculiar detail of faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from behind one of the doors. It was barely audible but persistent. Her curiosity piqued. She decided to investigate.
She opened the door from which the sound was coming, and inside was an empty room with a single window. The window showed a view of the city, but the scene was distorted, almost like looking through a funhouse mirror. The cityscape was twisted and surreal, with buildings that seemed to float and bend in impossible ways. The tapping grew louder as she approached the window, and Evelyn noticed a pattern. The shapes outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with the tapping. It was as though the city itself was alive and communicating with her. Suddenly, the floor beneath her trembled, and the room started to warp. Evelyn felt a rush of panic. The walls closed in, and the distorted cityscape began to swirl. She stumbled back, trying to make sense of what was happening. The rhythmic tapping turned into a cacophony, reverberating through the room. Desperate, Evelyn turned back to the door she had come through. To her horror, it had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. She was trapped. The room continued to distort, and the tapping sound grew louder until it was deafening. In a frantic bid to escape, Evelyn searched for anything that might help. She noticed an old journal lying on the floor, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping through it, she found entries that described similar experiences from decades earlier. Other tenants who had discovered the 13th floor and faced the same terrifying phenomenon. One entry caught her eye. "The floor is a gateway. It shows what you fear most. To leave, you must confront it." With no other options, Evelyn decided to face her fear. She took a deep breath and focused on the distorted cityscape outside. As she concentrated, the view began to change. The swirling patterns slowed and the shapes outside started to resolve into familiar landmarks. The room's distortion began to subside, and the tapping sound faded. The door reappeared, now clearly marked as the exit. Evelyn rushed through it and down the stairwell, her heart pounding. When she reached the 12th floor, everything felt normal again. The building was as she remembered it, no sign of the eerie 13th floor. She looked back at the stairwell, but it had vanished, blending seamlessly into the wall. Evelyn never spoke of her experience to anyone. The grand view continued to function as usual, but she occasionally heard whispers about the 13th floor from other tenants. Though she remained in the building for years, She never ventured near the hidden stairwell again. The 13th floor remained a mystery, a place that existed outside of reality, a gateway to something beyond human comprehension. And every so often, Evelyn would glance at the buildings for Wade, wondering if the floor still waited for someone else to discover its secrets.